Congregations with a well-defined sense of mission understand themselves to be on a journey of faith together that by its nature implies risk and uncertainty. Instead of fearing risk and uncertainty, missional congregations see it as the natural terrain for serving the needs of the world around them. Because a missional community adopts change as a practice, another benefit of a well-defined mission is the creation of community with give, flexibility, and resilience, the ability to bounce back. A spiritual practice is something that is restorative, done with depth, intention, and regularity, and a sense of consecration, connection to something beyond ourselves, God, the universe, a cause, our faith tradition, friends, family, the place where we work. When we understand that change is a constant and that gradual change, at the very least, is the actual spiritual playing field we live in, we can approach the challenges of change, such as dealing with loss and the sense of insecurity, as well as new opportunities for growth and learning, as a deep, intentional, regular practice. It's what life in a faith community should be all about. Developing change as a spiritual practice helps us be resilient, to bounce back when conflict or difficulties arise. Change as spiritual practice makes us stronger for the journey. Change as spiritual practice helps us see the journey itself as the destination. Yet change can be very difficult, even traumatic. And how can something traumatic or difficult be restorative? I think it hinges on perspective and a desire to transform beyond what we already are. And transformation is not something we always choose to do voluntarily. A lot of the time we have to be jolted into it, and then we can choose to make it an intentional, ongoing, restorative act. Business consultant Bill Ekstrom uses a framework for getting companies and businesses and organizations out of their comfort zone. He calls it growth rings. He says we are always in one of 4 states or rings. He calls them stagnation, order, complexity, and chaos. Stagnation is just what it sounds like. Low performance, no growth. The organizational reasons for this are usually too many rules, too much needed permissions, and too much minutia, preventing creativity and innovation. Order, Ekstrom says, is where we like to be. Everything is in order. Everything is predictable and safe and comfortable. It's the comfort zone. And the comfort zone's biggest selling point is also its biggest drawback. It's very safe and very comfortable. Complexity, Ekstrom says, is where we should ideally operate. Complexity happens when there's a disruption to the order. Not complete disillusion of the order, but a disruption of the order. When things change, there is some disorder, and outcomes become unpredictable. And unpredictable makes us uncomfortable. But unpredictable and uncomfortable allow for innovation, growth, and experimentation. Chaos, Ekstrom says, is when we have no control over input or output, and it seems everything is disordered. There's turmoil and no growth. It feels incomprehensible, even insane. Some disorder is complexity. Complete disorder is chaos. In order to grow, for individuals or organizations, there needs to be some disruption, trying something different, experimenting, but not complete disruption. Making change a living practice allows us to live in a state of complexity. We're a bit unsettled, but still grounded enough, and the unsettled keeps us on our toes. There is a tendency, however, for both individuals and groups to feel that any disruption, even in the smallest amount, isn't complexity but chaos. Long stagnant systems and even long stagnant people with long stagnant personal habits experience any disruption at all as chaos when it's actually complexity. And this reactive response, if sustained, eventually pushes the individual or organization into chaos. In congregational life, interim ministry is a planned disruption. It's supposed to cause complexity. Resistance to that complexity creates chaos. Ekstrom points out there are a number of different ways to be disrupted, but most of them are things we don't like. We're forced into it. Things like interim ministry, or job loss, or divorce, or major illness. Few people or groups choose complexity. And that's a shame, because that's where the energy, the growth, and the vital life happens. As Unitarian Universalists, we are people that have no trouble with the concept of evolution. Frequently, we are defenders of science in a community when something such as creationism rears its ugly head. And yet our communities, like most communities, fear change and resist evolution ourselves. We operate out of an assumption all too often that there's one best way to do things, one best practice. And if we just figure it out, we can conquer whatever it is we're facing. A specific program, a specific issue. But that is not the reality of our postmodern world. There is no upward and onward forever. There is no privileged vantage point. Not only can we not always find a solution, some things we find out really seem to have no solution. Spiritual writer Mark Nepo tells a story about a glass blower that emphasizes the importance of resiliency and complexity. The glass blower knows, he says, that while in the heat of beginning, any shape is possible. But once hardened, the only way to change is to break. And so it is with individuals and groups. While we stay malleable and shapeable, we can adapt and maneuver the ups and downs of life and live in a state of complexity. But once we get too set in our ways, the only way to move forward is to break, to shatter what might already be in existence. The hardened glass may be beautiful or functional or both, but it is not resilient and adaptable. Once it cools and hardens, smashing it is the only way to change its shape. Resilience and complexity allow for change without breaking the glass. Resilience and practicing complexity intentionally keep the glass in a hot, malleable state on purpose. This is the attitude and approach we need to remain mission-focused and vital. A congregation that engages change as an ongoing spiritual practice learns that becoming too set in its ways leads to decline and stagnation. Remaining flexible and continuing to evolve bring life and growth. Life and growth are the journey, and the journey is the destination. I think our congregation has demonstrated over and over this reality the last few years. Although there is much desire and has been much desire to grow, until very recently, there's really been very little real willingness to do anything substantially different in order to achieve that growth. And once anything is too set in its ways, the only way to change is to break. To break with the past, to shatter the that's the way we've always done it. And any heat whatsoever that sought to make us malleable again can be considered too hot. But we've got to adjust to the temperature. And thus, in a very real sense, we can avoid breaking. This is our task. We have no choice but to enter complexity and practice change intentionally. There are skills and tools we can use to help us thrive in a complex state. Not just organizationally, but individually, we need to be honest about how we think and feel and not hide truth. Not hide it when we are upset or confused or angry or sad or grieving. It is countercultural here and in many New England congregations and many New England churches. Countercultural to be open about unpleasant emotions. But avoiding difficult emotions and conversations is part of stagnation, not complexity. Another skill or tool for complexity is conversation. Constantly practicing opportunities to be seen and heard. Another is curiosity, making an effort to let go of our assumptions of other people's intentions and motives and reasons, and stay curious. Curiosity is a skill for complexity. I've noticed in my time here that, especially the first 2 years I was here, the congregation really strongly practiced avoiding negative emotions, avoiding having difficult conversations, and mistrusting new people and new ideas. Now this has begun to change, and we should practice this intentionally going forward. And it's a good time to engage evolution, complexity, and change as Unitarian Universalists, because our entire association is asking us to do this together on many fronts. One thing in particular they're asking us to engage as a complex, ongoing practice of change is racism and white supremacy culture in our congregations and in our world. On the UUA website, there is a special page devoted just to this. It outlines why we must actively engage in dismantling white supremacy, and it invites us, calls us, challenges us to do this work, and provides links and downloads for educational and organizing resources. Boldly stated on our UUA webpage on white supremacy is this: white supremacy affects everyone, and each of us has agency to undo it. There is work to do in congregations, and there is personal work to do. White supremacy is the idea that white people are better and more deserving of wealth, power, and privilege than people of color. White supremacy pervades our culture, institutions, and relationships. It is a self-perpetuating system that continues to fuel colonialism, exploitation, oppression, inequities, and brutalities that people of color experience. As Unitarian Universalists, we must fight white supremacy individually and together if we hold hope for beloved community. Now, among the things specifically stated as action items that we are called to engage as Unitarian Universalists is this: communicate with others about the harm caused to people in communities of color by different expressions of white supremacy. Systemic, overt, and microaggressive. And also to create spaces for conversations about race. The realization that our congregation once put on blackface minstrel shows is a perfect opportunity to practice what we are called to do. Let's communicate an apology for the blatantly racist and evil past behavior of the congregation. It gives us an opportunity to begin a conversation about race, what our association is explicitly begging us to do. A conversation about race is uncomfortable and risky, but it's doable. Last week, I went with our president to meet the new director of the library, Robin York, and police chief Mark Gianovella. Robin York agreed that we could work together to try and do some educational things about having difficult conversations, maybe even addressing race. Awesome. In the conversation with Chief Giovanella, I challenged him that his attitude about not seeing color is in itself racist. A lesson we all need to learn, including me, over and over and over again. That not recognizing how someone's identity and appearance impacts their life in ways much different from ours is to see them for who they really are. To claim we don't see color is to claim another's experience of being treated differently, and usually mistreated, can't be due to their color or appearance or any other trait intrinsic to their identity. The chief and I agreed to disagree. We had a difficult conversation like respectful adults. No one raised their voice, no one stormed away. We shook hands. We agreed to continue conversation. I was so impressed, I'm sending him a thank you next week. Activist and writer Adrienne Marie Brown has some great advice I think is an outline for not only how to engage a process of change as spiritual practice, but how to also engage one's own identity, one's life, one's color, sexuality, gender, religion, national origin as spiritual practice. She says, where we are born into privilege, we are charged with dismantling any myth of supremacy. Where we are born into struggle, we are charged with claiming our dignity, joy, and liberation. Example from the news we've shared about here this morning. In the United Methodist Church this past week, people who are straight and not queer are charged in the United Methodist Church and everywhere with dismantling the myth of cisgendered heterosexual supremacy. People who fall into the LGBTQ community are called to claim their dignity, joy, and liberation. These two tasks make a great practice to help manage the practice of change. Dismantle superiority and claim joy. These practices are tied together into one. They create a balance that allows us to enter into complexity and thrive. Celebrating our joy, dignity, and liberation remind us we are good. Letting go of privilege reminds us we are not perfect and there's always work to do better. We are never finished. But the goal isn't to be finished or perfect or comfortable. The goal is the journey of ongoing transformation. The journey brings with it no guarantees. Joseph Campbell says of the hero's journey, if you can see your path laid out in front of you step by step, you know it's not your path. Your own path you make with every step you take. That's why it's your path. Church is not a destination. It's a launching pad. No one goes to the airport just to go to the airport. The airport is not a destination. It's a launching pad so you can take a journey somewhere else. And so it should be with church. So what journey should we take? Among the resources for the theme of journey from our Soul Matters this month is a brief reflection on the etymology, the word origin of journey. Has its roots in the Old French journée, a day's length, a day's work, a day's travel. A day laborer is a journeyman. We write our daily adventures and thoughts in a journal. Looking at life as a journey, the idea of each new day becomes central. What part of my past do I carry forward into this day, and what part do I leave behind? How do I set my compass for the travels of this day, moving into my own becoming? Change as spiritual practice offers us this choice daily. We can look backward into the past or journey boldly into today and tomorrow.